My name is Cassandra Mitchell Hayes, and I'm 32 years old. 3 years ago, on the morning of my brother's engagement party, I found out I'd been uninvited through a mass text message that was never meant to reach me. My mother had typed the words in the family group chat, not realizing my cousin Becca hadn't removed me yet. The Mitchells will be photographed for the Houston Chronicle Society page. Cassandra's scrubs don't exactly fit the aesthetic. Tell her something came up with the venue capacity. The message had 14 thumbs-up reactions. 14 family members who agreed I was too embarrassing to stand next to. I didn't cry. I didn't call demanding answers. I simply stopped showing up to a family that had already decided I didn't belong. What my mother didn't know was that 3 years later, I'd be standing in the Texas State Capitol Rotunda, shaking hands with the governor, while she sat in the back row realizing that the daughter she'd hidden away had just saved the life of his only grandson. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to something real in your life. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. Let me start from the beginning. The night I discovered I was the family's secret they were ashamed to keep. Growing up Mitchell in suburban Houston meant growing up in the shadow of expectations so tall they blocked out the sun. My mother, Diana Mitchell, had married into old Texas oil money and spent the next 40 years making sure no one ever forgot it. She chaired 3 charity boards, hosted the annual Bluebonnet Gala at our River Oaks estate, and collected Hermes Birkin bags the way other women collected memories. Her closet had its own climate control system. I'm not exaggerating. My brother Jonathan was the crown prince. 40 years old, chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Houston Methodist, the kind of doctor who got profiled in Texas Monthly and invited to speak at conferences in Switzerland. He drove a Porsche Cayenne and married a woman named Ashley, who had never worked a day in her life but somehow always looked exhausted from the effort of being rich. Then there was my sister Priscilla, 37, partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in the state, specializing in corporate mergers that made headlines. She lived in a penthouse downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a shoe closet that could qualify as a studio apartment. Her Instagram was a carefully curated museum of brunches, vacations, and humble brags about her crazy busy schedule. And then there was me, Cassandra, the youngest, the one who chose a path my mother couldn't photograph for the society pages. I was a registered nurse in the pediatric intensive care unit at Texas Children's Hospital. I worked 12-hour night shifts, wore scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and fear, and drove a 7-year-old Toyota Corolla with a dent in the passenger door from a parking lot mishap I couldn't afford to fix. My apartment was a 1-bedroom in Montrose, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbor's Netflix through the walls. But here's what never made it into the Mitchell family Christmas card. I didn't become a nurse because I couldn't do anything else. When I was 18, I had a 4.3 gigapascals and early acceptance to Rice University for pre-law. My mother had already planned my trajectory: law school, then a partnership, then a suitable marriage to someone from a good family. She'd told her friends at the junior league that all 3 Mitchell children would be professionals. Doctors, lawyers, the works. The summer before college, my grandmother had a stroke. Mama Ruth, my father's mother, the only person in our family who ever made me feel like enough just as I was. She spent 6 weeks in the ICU, and I spent every moment I could at her bedside, watching the nurses work. There was one nurse named Patricia. She had gray streaks in her hair and laugh lines around her eyes, and she treated my grandmother like she was the most important person in the world. When Mama was scared, Patricia held her hand. When Mama was confused, Patricia explained everything 3 times without a hint of impatience. When Mama finally passed, Patricia sat with me in the hallway and let me cry on her shoulder. That was the moment I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I called my mother that night. I told her I was declining pre-law. I was going to nursing school instead. The silence lasted 23 seconds. I counted each one. "You want to be a nurse," she finally said, her voice flat. "You want to wipe bottoms and empty bedpans for the rest of your life." "I want to help people, Mom. I want to be there for them, like Patricia was there for Mama." Another silence. Then, "Your grandmother would be ashamed." She hung up, She didn't come to my nursing school graduation. She sent a card with a check for $50 and a note that said, "Best of luck with your little career." I cashed the check because I needed gas money. But I never forgot those words. Little career. As if saving children's lives was something small. The erasure happened gradually, like a photograph fading in the sun. Thanksgiving 2019. I arrived at my mother's house with a homemade pecan pie, Mama's recipe, the one she'd taught me when I was 12. When I walked into the dining room, I found my place setting at the small card table in the corner, the one reserved for Jonathan's stepchildren and Priscilla's boyfriend's nephew. "Oh, honey," my mother said, adjusting the diamond brooch on her street John jacket. "The main table only seats 12 comfortably. You don't mind, do you? You're so good with children." I was 29 years old. Christmas that year was worse. I'd saved for 3 months to buy my mother a Tiffany bracelet, a delicate silver piece that I thought she'd love. When she opened it, she smiled tightly and said, "How thoughtful." Then she turned to Priscilla, who had gifted her a Cartier watch, and spent 20 minutes gushing about the craftsmanship. I found the bracelet 2 months later in a donation box in her garage. The price tag was still attached, but the final blow came on her birthday in February 2020. I called to ask what time dinner was. "Oh, Cassandra," she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed disappointment. "The restaurant could only accommodate 8. Your father, Jonathan and Ashley, Priscilla and her partner, and Aunt Vivian and Uncle Charles. You understand, don't you? Family comes first. 8 seats. And somehow I wasn't family enough to fill one of them. The only person who still treated me like a Mitchell was my cousin Rebecca. Becca was 26 then, my aunt's daughter, just starting her career in marketing, and still naive enough to believe family meant something. We'd been close since childhood. I used to pick her up from school when her parents were too busy fighting to remember she existed. Becca was the one who accidentally forwarded me the screenshot that changed everything. It was March 2021, a week before Jonathan's engagement party. I was working a double shift, running on caffeine and adrenaline, when my phone buzzed with a text from Becca. One word. "Sorry." Then the image loaded. It was from the Mitchell Family Events group chat, the one I thought I was still part of. My mother's message was time-stamped 7:43 p.m. Final reminder about Jonathan's engagement party. The Houston Chronicle Society photographer will be there. We need to present a unified, successful family image. Cassandra's presence might raise questions about why one of my children chose such a humble profession. I've told people she's doing medical missionary work in Guatemala. Very prestigious. Very unreachable. Please don't mention her actual job to anyone. Below it, Jonathan had replied. Makes sense. Don't want to explain the nurse thing. Priscilla's response was a simple thumbs-up emoji. My father had written nothing. He never did. He'd learned decades ago that silence was safer than disagreement. I sat in the break room at 2 a.m., staring at that screenshot, reading it over and over. Humble profession, the nurse thing, medical missionary work in Guatemala. My mother hadn't just excluded me. She'd invented a fictional version of me that she could brag about. The real Cassandra, the one who held dying children and comforted terrified parents and hadn't slept more than 5 hours in 3 days, was too embarrassing to acknowledge. I saved that screenshot in a folder I named Receipts. I didn't know then that I'd need it. I just knew I couldn't let those words disappear. By morning, I'd made my decision. If my family wanted me gone, I would give them exactly what they asked for, but not because they demanded it, because I chose it. I blocked my mother's number, then Jonathan's, then Priscilla's. I deleted Facebook so I wouldn't have to see their curated family photos, their humble brags about their perfect Mitchell lives. I didn't know then that my silence would last 3 years. I didn't know those 3 years would change everything. 6 months after the engagement party I wasn't invited to, Becca called with an update. The wedding photos are everywhere, she said quietly. Your mom gave an interview to the Chronicle. She said all her children were thriving. She mentioned Jonathan's surgery career and Priscilla's law firm, and she said you were running a children's health clinic in Central America. I laughed. The bitter kind that scrapes your throat. I haven't left Texas in 4 years. I know. Becca paused. Cass, She told people you were nominated for some international humanitarian award, that you're saving orphans in Guatemala. I was currently on hour 11 of a shift where I'd already coded one patient and comforted 3 families receiving the worst news of their lives. Saving orphans in Guatemala. That's when I understood. My mother didn't hate me. She hated what my existence said about her. So she'd invented a version of me that fit her narrative. A humanitarian hero, conveniently unreachable. The real me, the one saving children's lives 90 miles away in the same city, was already a ghost. I met Daniel Hayes on a rainy Tuesday in September, covered in mud and barely holding it together. I was leaving the hospital after a brutal shift when I noticed a crowd gathered outside the emergency entrance. A pickup truck had jumped the curb, and a man was pulling a German Shepherd from the passenger seat, the dog clearly injured and the man clearly panicking. I was off the clock. I was exhausted. I had every reason to walk to my car and go home. Instead, I jogged over. "Sir, what happened?" The man looked up at me, rain dripping down his face, his Houston Fire Department t-shirt soaked through. "A car hit her. I was driving home and someone just ran her right over and drove away. Please, is there an animal ER nearby? Please." His voice cracked on that last word. This giant of a man, clearly used to running into burning buildings, was falling apart over his injured dog. I knelt beside him, assessed the dog quickly, applying pressure to the wound on her leg. "There's an emergency vet clinic about 2 miles from here. I can help you get her there. What's her name?" "Lucy," he said. "Her name is Lucy. She's all I have left." I later learned that Daniel had lost his wife to cancer 18 months earlier. Lucy had been her dog, her constant companion through chemo and radiation and the long months of hoping. After Sarah passed, Lucy was the only reason Daniel got out of bed some mornings. I followed him to the vet clinic, helped carry Lucy inside, and sat with him in the waiting room for 3 hours while the surgical team worked on her leg. When the vet finally came out and said Lucy would make a full recovery, Daniel broke down crying. And then he asked if he could buy me coffee sometime to thank me properly. I said yes. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekends at his small house near the fire station, where Lucy would curl up between us on the couch while we watched terrible movies, and I finally felt like I could breathe. Daniel didn't care that I made a fraction of what my siblings made. He didn't care that my car had a dent or my apartment was small. He cared that I laughed at his terrible jokes, that I cried at the same commercials he did, that I held his hand when he talked about Sarah without trying to rush him through his grief. A year later, he proposed in his backyard under the oak tree where we'd had our first real conversation. Lucy wore a bow tie for the occasion. We got married at the courthouse 6 months after that. Just us and Becca and a few friends from the hospital. No society photographer, no Hermes scarves, no performance. Just love. Just family. I officially became Cassandra Mitchell Hayes, and for the first time in my life, my last name felt like something I was proud of. The next 2 years unfolded like chapters of a book I was finally allowed to write myself. Daniel and I bought a small house with a big backyard where Lucy could run. I started pursuing my certification as a pediatric nurse practitioner, studying at 5 a.m. before my shifts, writing papers in the break room, determined to advance in a career I'd never stopped loving. When the position opened for nurse manager of the PICU, I applied expecting nothing. The interview panel included 3 hospital administrators and the chief nursing officer, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Torres, who had been my mentor since my first terrifying week on the unit. I got the job. Through all of it, I stayed invisible to the Mitchells. No social media announcements, no proud texts to family who didn't want to hear from me. Somewhere in River Oaks, my mother was still telling people I was healing children in Guatemala. Somewhere in his surgical suite, Jonathan was still pretending he only had one sister. Somewhere in her penthouse, Priscilla was still posting family photos from gatherings I'd never know about. They had no idea who I'd become. And I wasn't ready to tell them. Not yet. The phone call came on a Wednesday afternoon in April 2024. "Mrs. Hayes." The voice was formal, slightly breathless. "This is Marcus Chen, Chief of Staff at the Governor's office. We need to speak with you urgently." I almost hung up, certain it was a scam, but something in his tone made me hesitate. "I'm sorry. This is regarding what exactly?" Ma'am, 18 months ago, you treated a 7-year-old boy named Elijah Walker in the pediatric ICU at Texas Children's Hospital, a near-drowning incident. You were the nurse who identified the secondary cardiac complication that the initial team had missed. Your intervention saved his life. I remembered Elijah. I remembered his terrified parents, his grandmother praying in the corner of the room, the moment I noticed the irregular rhythm on his monitor that everyone else had dismissed as artifact. I remembered fighting to get the attending to listen to me, to run the additional tests that revealed the underlying heart defect the drowning had exacerbated. I remember him, I said slowly. Is he okay? He's more than okay, Mrs. Hayes. He's thriving. And his grandfather would very much like to thank you personally. His grandfather, Governor Marcus Walker. The award ceremony was held in the Texas State Capitol Rotunda, a soaring space of marble and history that I'd only ever seen in photographs. The Texas Nursing Excellence Awards recognized 12 nurses from across the state, but I was being given a special commendation, the Governor's Medal of Merit, for exceptional service. The night before the ceremony, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank notepad and a sleeping Lucy at my feet. Daniel was working an overnight shift at the station, so it was just me and the weight of what was about to happen. I didn't know who to thank. My colleagues, obviously. Dr. Torres, who had championed me when no one else did. Daniel, who believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. Becca, who had never stopped being my family even when everyone else had. And that was the complete list. I thought about my mother, about the woman who had hosted charity galas while pretending I was saving orphans in Guatemala, the woman who had photoshopped me out of her family portrait by simply pretending I didn't exist. I started writing. I want to thank my family, the family I chose, and the family that chose me back. I didn't know it then, but someone had already told my mother about the ceremony. Becca called me the morning of the event, her voice tight with warning. Cass, I need to tell you something. Your mom saw the press release from the governor's office. She called Aunt Vivian last night, absolutely furious. Furious about what? That she didn't know. That you've been here this whole time. That she's been telling people you were in Guatemala, and now there's proof you weren't. Becca took a breath. Cass, she said she's coming to the ceremony. My stomach dropped. She wasn't invited. I know. She called the governor's office pretending to be your family representative. They told her the family seating was already arranged. She threw a fit, apparently, demanded to speak to someone in charge. Becca paused. She's bringing Jonathan and Priscilla. They've already rearranged their schedules. I closed my eyes. Of course they had. Cass, what are you going to do? I'm going to let them come, I said quietly. And then I'm going to tell the truth. The rotunda was packed with 500 people when I arrived. Nurses from every corner of Texas, hospital administrators, state officials, journalists. And in the back row, 3 seats I hadn't arranged, sat my mother in her Chanel suit, Jonathan in his tailored Tom Ford, and Priscilla in red Valentino, her camera-ready smile already fixed in place. They looked exactly like what they were. People who had shown up for the photo opportunity. Daniel sat in the front row, holding Lucy's leash because the governor had specifically requested she attend. Becca sat beside him, nervous and proud. Dr. Torres had saved me a seat next to the other honorees, and she squeezed my hand as I sat down. You've earned this, she whispered. Every bit of it. Governor Walker spoke first, telling the story of his grandson Elijah, of the terrifying night they almost lost him, of the nurse who noticed what everyone else had missed. His voice cracked when he talked about his daughter calling him from the hospital, crying, saying there was a nurse named Cassandra who wouldn't give up. She fought for my grandson's life, the governor said, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. She fought when others would have accepted what seemed inevitable. That is what nursing is. That is what service looks like. When he called my name, I walked to the podium on legs that felt steadier than I'd expected. 500 faces looked up at me. Cameras recorded every breath. And in the back row, 3 people in designer clothes waited for the acknowledgement they'd driven across the city to receive. Thank you, Governor Walker, I began. Thank you to the Texas Nurses Association, to Texas Children's Hospital, and to everyone who made today possible. I looked out at the crowd. At the nurses who worked doubles and triples and holidays, who held hands and wiped tears and made impossible moments bearable. When I became a nurse 12 years ago, some people questioned whether it was a worthwhile path. I paused. They wondered why I would choose modest pay and long hours when I could have pursued something more prestigious, something more impressive at dinner parties. Silence. But here's what I've learned. Nursing isn't about impressing anyone. It's about being present for people on the worst days of their lives. It's about holding a mother's hand while her child codes. It's about noticing the thing everyone else missed because you refused to give up. I took a breath. Which brings me to my thank yous. To my colleagues at Texas Children's, you are my village. To Dr. Evelyn Torres, who saw something in me when I was just a terrified new grad with imposter syndrome. I owe you everything. I turned toward the front row. And to my family? In the back, I saw my mother lean forward slightly. Priscilla adjusted her hair. My husband, Daniel, who believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. And Lucy. I smiled at the German shepherd sitting proudly at Daniel's feet, who reminds me every day that love doesn't care about job titles. I stopped. That was the list. From the back of the room, a voice cut through the silence. Cassandra. My mother was standing, her Chanel suit catching the light, her face a careful mask of wounded confusion. Surely you didn't forget your own mother. 500 heads turned. Cameras swiveled. The governor's security detail shifted uncomfortably. I gripped the edges of the podium. Mrs. Mitchell, I said calmly, my voice amplified for everyone to hear. Thank you for attending. Her smile flickered. Cassandra, I raised you. I supported you. I don't understand why. You told our family that my profession was too humble to acknowledge. I kept my voice steady. 3 years ago, you wrote in a group message that you'd told people I was doing missionary work in Guatemala because you were ashamed to admit I was a nurse. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I've simply honored your decision, I continued. You didn't want to claim me as your daughter when I was emptying bedpans and working night shifts. You don't get to claim me now that the governor is shaking my hand. The silence stretched like taffy. From somewhere in the middle of the rotunda, an older woman stood up, gray-haired, wearing scrubs under her blazer, clearly a nurse who'd come to support her colleagues. She started clapping. Another person stood. Then 5. Then 20. The applause built like a wave, rolling through the rotunda until every nurse in that room was on their feet. My mother stood frozen in the back row, Priscilla tugging at her arm. Jonathan's jaw clenched so tight I could see it from the stage. For the first time in my life, I didn't need my family's approval. I had something better. I had the respect of people who understood what I did for a living. People who knew that there's nothing lowly about holding a child's hand while they fight for their life. They cornered me in the hallway afterward. My mother's mask had cracked. Her Chanel looked somehow less polished, her pearls less luminous. That was completely unnecessary, she hissed. You humiliated me in front of the governor. I stated facts, I said calmly. I have the screenshot, Mom. Time-stamped. Your words. That was taken out of context. I was stressed about the engagement party photos. You know how those society events are. I know that you invented a fictional version of me so you wouldn't have to admit your daughter was a nurse. Priscilla stepped forward. Cassandra, let's be reasonable. We came here to support you. You came here for a photo op. I kept my voice level. I saw the family group chat, Priscilla. Jonathan asking if you should bring flowers. You coordinating outfits. Not one message asking if I wanted you there. Jonathan tried his surgeon voice, calm and authoritative. This is getting out of hand. We're family. We should discuss this privately. You decided 3 years ago that we weren't family. I pulled out my phone, showed them the screenshot I'd carried for 1,096 days. Cassandra's scrubs don't exactly fit the aesthetic. Those are Mom's words. You all agreed. 14 thumbs-up reactions. My mother's face went pale. I've spent 3 years building a life without you, I continued. A good life, a husband who loves me, a career I'm proud of, friends who show up. I didn't do that to punish you. I did it because I finally learned that I don't have to beg to be loved by people who see me as an embarrassment. Daniel appeared at my shoulder, Lucy's leash in one hand, his other hand warm on my back. Ready to go home? He asked. More than ready. I turned to face my mother one last time. I don't hate you, Mom. Hating you would mean you still control my life. You don't. Not anymore. I took a breath. But I need you to understand something. You made a choice. You chose your image over your daughter. You chose the opinions of women at charity galas over a child who loved you. Her lip trembled. I'm not asking you to apologize. I don't need your apology to be happy. But if you ever want a relationship with me, it starts with you acknowledging what happened. Not explaining it. Not excusing it. Acknowledging it. I squeezed Daniel's hand. Goodbye, Mrs. Mitchell. We walked out into the Texas sunshine, Lucy trotting happily beside us, and I didn't look back. The fallout took months to fully unfold. Becca kept me updated whether I asked or not. Your mom resigned from 2 of her charity boards, she told me over coffee a few months later. The story got around. Everyone knows now. Some journalist from the Chronicle was at the ceremony and wrote a piece about it. I stirred my latte, watching the foam swirl. And Jonathan and Priscilla. Jonathan's been quiet. Priscilla deleted her social media. Someone in the comments of her law firm's page asked if she was the sister who gave a thumbs up when her mom disowned her sibling. I felt a twinge of something. Not quite satisfaction. Something closer to exhaustion. I didn't do any of this to destroy them, I said. I know. I did it because I was tired of being invisible. Becca reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You were never invisible, Cass. Not to the people who mattered. 6 months later, I learned what peace actually feels like. Our little house was never quiet. Daniel's crew from the station came over for barbecues. Lucy barked at squirrels. The neighbor kids asked me to check their scrapes and bruises because I was the nurse lady. But underneath the noise, there was stillness, the kind that comes from knowing exactly where you belong. I'd been promoted again, this time to director of pediatric nursing. The job was hard, the hours long, the paperwork endless. But every morning when I walked into my office, I saw a photo on my desk. Daniel and me and Lucy under our oak tree, the day he proposed. That was my reminder of what success actually looked like. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in October, almost exactly a year after the ceremony. No return address, just my name in my mother's careful cursive. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just holding it. You don't have to open it, Daniel said. I know. I opened it anyway. Cassandra, I've written this letter many times. Each time, I tried to explain, to justify, to make you understand why I did what I did. But the truth is simpler and uglier than any excuse I could give. I was afraid. Afraid of what people would think. Afraid of being judged. Afraid that your choices somehow reflected failures in me as a mother. I spent so many years trying to build a perfect image that I forgot to build a real family. I don't expect you to forgive me. I haven't forgiven myself. I just want you to know that I was wrong. Not stressed. Not taken out of context. Wrong. And I'm sorry for every day you spent believing you weren't enough. You were always enough. I was just too blind to see it. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Your mother. Even if that word doesn't mean to you what it should. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. What are you going to do? Daniel asked. I don't know. I looked out at the oak tree, its leaves turning gold in the autumn light. But for the first time, I think I don't need to know yet. If you've made it this far, I want to leave you with something. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't mean you have to let them back in. My mother grew up in a world where worth was measured in appearances, where love was conditional, where success meant impressing the right people. She passed that damage on to me because it was all she knew. But here's the truth. Her wounds don't excuse my scars, and healing myself doesn't require healing her. If you've ever been the family member who didn't fit the mold, the one whose career wasn't impressive enough, whose life wasn't Instagram-worthy enough, whose existence was inconvenient to the family narrative, I want you to know this. You are not responsible for making yourself smaller so others feel comfortable. You are not obligated to beg for love from people who should have given it freely. And you are absolutely allowed to build a new family from the people who actually show up. Boundaries aren't walls built from anger, they're doors you get to control. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your peace? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button. Thank you for being here with me. My name is Cassandra. I'm a nurse, and I finally know what family really means.